You remember the moment, don't you? Maybe you were sitting at a dinner table, surrounded by people you'd known for years, and someone said something shallow, something that revealed in a single sentence that the conversation happening in their head and the conversation happening in yours existed in entirely different universes. And you smiled, you nodded, you said the right thing. But inside, something quietly collapsed. Not anger, not superiority, just exhaustion. A bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of sleep could fix. Because the problem wasn't that people were being cruel to you. The problem was that they were being perfectly, genuinely, sincerely themselves. And that self had nothing to do with you. You've spent years trying to bridge that gap. You've tried being louder, simpler, funnier. You've learned how to perform small talk like a second language. You've dimmed your thoughts, softened your opinions, laughed at jokes that didn't land in your chest. And what did it cost you? Everything, slowly, quietly, without anyone noticing, including you. Here's what nobody tells you. The feeling you've been calling loneliness isn't a flaw. It isn't anxiety or arrogance or some social dysfunction that therapy can fix. It is, according to one of history's most brutally honest philosophers, the natural and inevitable consequence of possessing a mind that operates on a frequency most people simply cannot receive. Arthur Schopenhauer saw this 2 centuries ago with a clarity that modern psychology is only now beginning to confirm. And in this essay, we're going to follow that clarity all the way down, past the self-help platitudes, past the forced positivity, into the cold, liberating truth about why you stopped fitting in, why that was never really your failure, and what it actually means to live with a mind like yours. This won't be comfortable, but it will be honest. Let's begin. Here's the first brutal truth. Not all minds are equal. That sentence makes people uncomfortable. We live in a culture that has decided, for social peace, for democratic principle, for kindness, that intelligence is either irrelevant or uniformly distributed. We celebrate different kinds of smart. We insist that everyone has something valuable to contribute. And in a moral sense, yes, every human being has dignity, worth, a right to exist without judgment. But intellectually, cognitively, in the raw capacity to hold complexity, to sit with ambiguity, to feel the weight of a real idea. No, it is not equal. And Schopenhauer refused to pretend otherwise. He wrote, "The fundament upon which all our knowledge and learning rests is the inexplicable. Every explanation leads back to this." What he meant was simple and devastating. Most people never reach the point of real thinking. They reach the point of conclusion, the comfortable, pre-packaged answer, and they stop. The capacity to keep going, to resist the comfort of certainty, to tolerate the vertigo of genuine inquiry, that is rare, rarer than we admit. And here's where it gets personal for you. Think about the last time you tried to share an idea, not an opinion, not a hot take, but a real idea, something you'd actually wrestled with, something that had kept you awake at 2 a.m. because you couldn't quite fit it into a simple sentence. What happened? Did they engage? Did they push back with something that sharpened your thinking? Or did they nod, that polite, disconnected nod, and redirect the conversation to something safer, something about weekend plans, or a television show, or someone else's drama? That nod, you know the one. Schopenhauer identified three types of minds. The first, the majority, are driven entirely by sensation and immediate desire. They feel, they react, they consume. The second are capable of reason, logic, planning, practicality. They can follow an argument, execute a strategy, solve a defined problem. The third and smallest are capable of what he called pure contemplation, the ability to step outside personal desire entirely and perceive the world as it actually is, not as they wish it to be. You don't need a philosopher to tell you which category most dinner conversations come from. The problem isn't that shallow people are malicious. They aren't. The problem is structural. You are trying to have a Category 3 conversation inside a Category 1 world, and the collision, that quiet, exhausting collision, is what you've been calling your social anxiety, your loneliness, your inability to connect. It was never a defect. It was a mismatch. And the sooner you stop trying to fix the mismatch by shrinking yourself into a smaller category, the sooner you can start doing something far more important, which we'll get to. But first, you need to understand exactly what the social world is actually built for, because it isn't for you. Society is not a philosophical salon. It never was. Society is a survival mechanism. It is a system built to coordinate the behavior of millions of people who, for the most part, operate on instinct, habit, and social pressure. And for that system to function, it needs conformity. It needs predictability. It needs people who will follow the script. The script goes like this. Want what others want. Value what others value. Signal your belonging loudly and often. Shrink anything that makes you too different, too complex, too much. Most people follow this script without knowing it's a script. And here's the dark part. It works for them. Not because it makes them happy, but because it makes them safe. They belong. They are seen. They are validated. The social machine gives them what they need most, the feeling that they are not alone. You kept breaking the machine. Not because you're broken, but because you kept saying the wrong lines. You asked questions nobody was asking. You noticed things nobody wanted to notice. You brought complexity into rooms that had agreed, silently and collectively, to stay simple. Schopenhauer wrote, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone, and if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom. For it is only when he is alone that he is really free." Read that again. Freedom, real freedom, requires solitude, not as punishment, not as failure, as precondition. The reason you feel the pull toward solitude, toward your books, your thoughts, your long walks and late nights, isn't antisocial pathology. It is philosophical instinct. Your mind knows, even when your culture tells it otherwise, that the compression required to survive in most social environments destroys something essential. Modern psychology has started to catch up with this. Research on introversion and high sensitivity, the work of Elaine Aron of Susan Cain, confirms that a significant portion of the population processes information more deeply, more richly, and more exhaustingly than the norm. They are not broken extroverts. They are, neurologically speaking, operating on a different gear ratio. The same engine, more torque, higher cost. But Schopenhauer would go further than the psychologists. He wouldn't just say you're wired differently. He would say you perceive more. And perceiving more, seeing the machinery beneath the social performance, feeling the weight of ideas that others move past without blinking, is not a gift in the way motivational speakers mean it. It is a burden that comes with a specific and non-negotiable price. You will never fully fit in.
Not because you failed to try, but because fitting in requires a certain selective blindness, a willingness to unsee what you cannot unsee. And you cannot unsee it anymore. So, what do most people with minds like yours do? They spend decades trying to fake the blindness, and the cost of that performance, the anxiety, the exhaustion, the creeping sense that you are somehow failing at being a person, is what brings them eventually to a philosophy like this one. You've probably been told in various forms the same three things. 1. Push yourself. Get out of your comfort zone. Go to the party. Say yes more. Be more social. 2. Find your tribe. Your people are out there, you just haven't found them yet. 3. Work on yourself. If connection feels hard, that's a you problem. Go to therapy. Develop social skills. Learn to be more present. All of this advice shares a common assumption that the goal is to fit in, that the destination is full social integration, and the only question is which route gets you there. Schopenhauer would look at this advice and call it what it is, a way of making you tolerable to a world that benefits from your conformity, dressed up as wisdom. He wrote, "The more intelligent a man is, the less mysterious existence seems to him." Think about what that means. The people handing out this advice, the life coaches, the well-meaning friends, the LinkedIn thought leaders, they find social connection easy because social connection, at the level they are operating it, is easy. It doesn't cost them their interior life. It doesn't require them to compress years of accumulated thought into sentences simple enough to survive a cocktail party. They tell you to go to the party because for them, the party works. For you, the party is a compression chamber. And here is the second level of wrongness in mainstream advice. It pathologizes the symptom without understanding the cause. If you feel alienated, the assumption is that something has gone wrong with you. But what if alienation is the correct response to an alienating situation? What if the person who feels deeply uncomfortable pretending to be less complex than they are is not malfunctioning, but functioning perfectly? Psychology, to its credit, has started naming this. The concept of the highly sensitive person captures part of it. Research on gifted adults, yes, adults, not just children, shows consistently that individuals with significantly higher cognitive complexity experience loneliness not as a side effect of poor social skills, but as a structural consequence of operating at a different level of abstraction than their environment. In other words, the environment is the misfit, not you. But here is where even the sympathetic psychological framing falls short. It tells you you're different. It does not tell you what to do with different. It does not explain why the loneliness doesn't go away, even when you do find people who are like you. It does not explain why the smartest people you've ever met still carry a particular quiet sadness, a sense of fundamental aloneness that persists regardless of how many conversations go well. For that, you need Schopenhauer, and what he offers isn't comfort, it is something better. At the center of Schopenhauer's entire philosophy is one concept, the will. Not willpower, not intention. The will, capital W, a blind, irrational, insatiable force that drives all living things. The will does not want happiness. The will does not want peace. The will wants, full stop, perpetually. Without satisfaction, without end. You experience the will every time you feel the pull toward belonging. You see a group of people laughing together, easy, fluent, without effort, and you feel it, the desire to be inside that, to be known, to be recognized,
To have someone look at you across a crowded room and understand you completely, without explanation. That desire is the will operating through you. And here is Schopenhauer's most devastating insight. The will does not care about your flourishing. It cares about its own continuation. It uses the promise of belonging to keep you striving, performing, contorting yourself. And then, when you achieve a moment of genuine connection, it waits exactly long enough for the relief to fade, and then starts again. He wrote, "Happiness is not possible. The best that can be achieved is a relatively painless state." This is not nihilism. This is mechanism. Think about the last time you found someone who seemed to get it, really get it. The conversation was alive. You didn't have to translate. You felt, for the first time in months, like your actual self was present in the room. And then, what? Days passed. The connection plateaued. The person revealed their own limitations, or life intervened and the intimacy faded. Or you simply realized that even they didn't get all of it, that there was still a room inside you they couldn't enter. This is not a failure of that person, or you, or the relationship. This is hedonic adaptation applied to belonging. The psychological phenomenon, well documented, well replicated, shows that human beings return to a baseline level of satisfaction regardless of what they acquire: money, status, love, friendship. The will drives you toward belonging. You reach it. It isn't enough. The will drives you forward again. Most people, Schopenhauer argues, never see this mechanism. They go around the cycle their entire lives, striving, achieving a moment of connection, losing it, striving again. And they interpret the recurring loss as evidence that they haven't found the right people yet, haven't worked hard enough on themselves yet, haven't gotten lucky enough yet. You, on the other hand, have started to see the mechanism. That's why it hurts in a different way for you. It isn't the pain of failure, it's the pain of comprehension. And the question, the only question that matters at this stage, is what you do once you see clearly. There are two responses to seeing the mechanism. The first is what most people with complex minds do instinctively, and it destroys them. They fight it. They intellectualize the loneliness into self-improvement. They develop a project, become more social, more relatable, more strategic in how they present themselves, and they pour enormous energy into engineering connection rather than experiencing it. They become very, very skilled at performing belonging while feeling none of it. The second response is what Schopenhauer spent his life articulating: resignation. Not the defeated, collapsed kind, the philosophical kind, the kind that looks clearly at what is real and decides to stop wasting energy on what isn't possible. He wrote, "Talent hits a target no one else can hit. Genius hits a target no one else can see." If you were reading this, if this language is landing with any recognition, you were probably aiming at targets others can't see. And every piece of advice that has told you to aim lower, to aim at the visible targets, to make your vision legible to those around you, has been, however well-intentioned, asking you to betray the most essential thing about your mind. So what do the intelligent few actually do? First, they stop apologizing for their interiority. Your inner life, the richness of it, the density of it, the fact that you can be genuinely occupied for hours by a single idea is not a social handicap. It is the only thing that makes you capable of producing anything of lasting value.
Stop treating it as a defect that needs correcting and start treating it as the primary resource you have. Second, they become ruthlessly selective. Not cold, not elitist in the performative sense, selective. They understand that one conversation per month that reaches the depth you need feeds you more than 30 conversations that don't. They stop filling their social calendar with noise and start protecting the silence in which real thought and real connection become possible. Third, they find their relationship with solitude. Not tolerate it, not endure it, find it, as in discover what it actually contains when you stop fleeing it. Schopenhauer didn't romanticize solitude. He was precise about it. The company of your own mind, if your mind is genuinely rich, is company, real company, the kind that doesn't exhaust you. And here is what none of the self-help literature will tell you. The goal is not to eventually find enough people who get you that the loneliness disappears. The loneliness will not disappear, but it can change in quality from the sharp, panicked loneliness of someone who believes they are broken to the quieter, more spacious solitude of someone who understands that their particular kind of mind was always going to require a different relationship with the world. That is not settling. That is arriving.
You do the thing that is hardest and most necessary. You accept it. Not as defeat, not as resignation in the broken sense, as clarity. Schopenhauer's philosophy has been called pessimism, and in the technical sense, it is. He believed that suffering is the default condition of conscious existence, and that the pursuit of pleasure, social or otherwise, produces more pain than it eliminates. But here is what his critics have always missed. His pessimism is not the end of the road. It is the beginning of a different road. Because once you stop spending your energy on the impossible, on forcing the world to understand you, on forcing yourself to fit a mold that was never designed for your dimensions, something extraordinary becomes available. Presence. Real presence, not the performed attention of someone who is simultaneously managing how they appear, but the deep, unhurried attention of someone who has nothing left to prove and nothing left to perform. He wrote, "The greatest of follies is to sacrifice health and what it brings with it for any other kind of happiness." He meant, don't sacrifice your psychological integrity, the coherence of your inner life, for the social approval of people who do not and cannot share your frequency. Now, is this an excuse to be arrogant, to dismiss people, to treat connection as beneath you? No. And this distinction matters enormously because the failure mode of this philosophy, the way smart people get it wrong, is to use Schopenhauer as permission for contempt, to use the language of intellectual hierarchy to justify loneliness they haven't actually processed, resentment they haven't examined, fear of vulnerability dressed up as philosophical superiority. That is not what this is. What this is, what Schopenhauer was actually pointing toward, is compassion without illusion. You understand that most people are operating from exactly where their minds allow them to operate. Not lesser beings, not failed versions of you, different vehicles running different software, trying to navigate the same impossible world. Your complexity does not make their simplicity contemptible. It makes it comprehensible. And when you reach that place, when you can see clearly without judging harshly, something shifts. You stop fighting to be understood by everyone, and you start being genuinely interested in understanding. You stop performing complexity and start deploying it. You stop waiting for the world to make space for you and start making space for yourself, deliberately, intentionally, without apology.
This is what Schopenhauer called the denial of the will, not the absence of desire, but the decision not to be enslaved by it. And it is, paradoxically, the closest thing to freedom that a conscious mind can reach.
Here is what all of this has been leading toward. You were never meant to fit in. Not as a tragic fact, not as a wound to be nursed, as a design specification. The minds throughout history that changed how human beings understand themselves, that wrote the books, composed the music, built the systems of thought that gave civilization its architecture, those minds did not fit in. Not because they were antisocial or damaged or uniquely cursed, but because fitting in, by definition, means aligning yourself with the existing consensus. And the existing consensus, by definition, cannot accommodate the person who is about to change it. Schopenha himself was ignored for the majority of his working life. He submitted his dissertation at the same time as Hegel, and Hegel filled the lecture halls, while Schopenhauer spoke to nearly empty rooms. He scheduled his lectures in direct conflict with Hegel's because he was certain his philosophy was superior. He was right. He just had to wait for a world that could hear it. You are not Schopenhauer. Most of us are not. But the principle holds. The mind that perceives more deeply than its environment will always experience a lag, a gap between what it sees and what the world is ready to recognize. That gap is not failure. It is timing. Accept it. The loneliness is real. Accept it. The exhaustion of performing belonging is real. Accept it. The specific grief of having thoughts you cannot share and feelings you cannot explain is real. Accept it. Not because nothing can be done, but because acceptance is the prerequisite for everything that can be done. Stop fighting reality. Stop spending your finite energy on the impossible conversion of those who cannot follow your thinking. Stop shrinking your interiority into shapes small enough to survive other people's comfort. Start building a life designed for the mind you actually have. Not the mind you wish you had, simpler, easier, better at dinner parties. The mind you have. Dense, recursive, restless, hungry, alive in ways that exhaust you and terrify you and will not let you rest. That mind is your only real asset. Schopenhauer spent 60 years in conversation with that kind of mind, his own, and what he produced still echoes 2 centuries later, not because he fit in, because he didn't, because he refused to compress his perception into something the world found comfortable. You have the same option. It will cost you belonging in the conventional sense. It will give you something rarer, and, if you can bear to receive it, something better.
If something in this essay landed, if you heard something you felt but never been able to articulate, then I want you to sit with that for a moment before you move on. Because that recognition, that's not just intellectual agreement, that's your mind meeting itself. And if this reached something real in you, do one thing. Write in the comments, "It made sense to me." That's all. 3 words. Because somewhere in this comment section, someone else with a mind like yours will read those words, and for a moment, they won't be alone. If this is your first time here, subscribe, not because algorithms need feeding, but because this is a place built for the minds that don't fit anywhere else. You don't have to fit in. You never did.